This documentary specifically coalesced Richard's journey, which I love.
That's the whole process of doing these things, you know. The layers of Richard Pryor are deep.
It really showed the evolution of Richard as an artist.
Not only as an artist, but as a human being. You know, I think, you know, a lot of his comedy was based on his experiences growing up in the working class. His ability to tell those stories without condescension, really just be respectful of the humanity of folks. It's just a great model, you know what I mean, for truth in storytelling.
He really pulled the covers off everybody to talk about race in a way that heretofore hadn't been discussed. It was brilliant, and people need to see this. They need to hear his voice now more than ever. Yeah.
Please welcome to the stage Jennifer Pryor, Jesse James Miller, Greg Tate, and Scott Saul. All right, I'll ask a couple questions, and then if we have time, we'll open it up to the audience. But first, you know, there's a lot of feelings happening backstage. So I was curious if you wanted to talk to some of the feelings that you're having right now.
Well, I'm very emotional right now. I'm sad, but I also am still amazed at Richard. He just still amazes me. I love him, I adore him. He's in the building tonight, by the way. I still talk to Richard. I feel that he's always with me. I feel that he's with a lot of people. I hope that you feel him too. I love this documentary because I think it was really honest about his evolution as an artist more than anything. In the past, there's been an emphasis on the scandals, the drugs, the women, the abuse, you know, all of that stuff is very easy to hold on to and grab. But the truth is that his artistry is quite amazing. I love what Mike Epps says about him too. You know, he should have been dead or in jail by the time he was 18, but he got out and he did something fucking amazing. And I was lucky enough to be on that wild ride with him and to love him very much.
Give it up for that, please. Well, you kind of naturally transitioned me into my first question, I guess you could say. When I look at my phone, I'm not texting. Okay. I was curious because there are, you know, and you touched on it a little bit right now, but have been other docs made. There have been other books written. So I was curious as to, and this is for the whole group, if you feel like answering. What is it that you were searching for in this version, and what is it that you wanted to present in this version that you felt hadn't been seen before or heard before? In other words, what was the central question you started this process with?
I think for me was being a humanist, you know, just showing his layers as deeply as they could and letting that direct the story process about who he really was. So I spent a lot of time reading and watching and feeling and talking to Jen, and he really dictated sort of the way that the movie kind of moves through his own archive. I was trying to give him a voice because I just noticed that that voice was missing, and not that the other docs are bad or good or whatever, but that was sort of missing from their pieces. And I spent, I mean, this gentleman over here, Scott, his book is a defining one, so I'll just let you speak as well.
Well, I mean, I think this is a marvelous film, and to me, its achievement is to like put Richard Pryor in history, and you see, like Jennifer was saying, that artistic evolution. And for all the people over here who are artists, you know, you're in motion. You don't know what you're going to create. And I think that was Richard's gift as well. He was not a prefab person. He improvised things into being by trusting that process of creation. He didn't know where it was going to go. And I think this film kind of captures that trajectory, which could be a roller coaster. But it also sets him in history, which I think is really important. And you know, fleshes out his multi-dimensionality. And even the way you end it, you know, it's like to have the ashes being scattered, but then to have him kind of puncturing some of the seriousness or the high-mindedness of this moment, I think speaks to how, just a little microcosm, how you were getting these different layers. And that's what makes his comedy so amazing, is that, yes, it can be funny, but there's always these other layers in his best moments.
Which brings me to another question, and thank you very much, Jennifer and Jesse, for sharing that moment with us when you go to Hana. And I guess I was curious as to, because you had said that you hadn't done it before, that you hadn't gone, and I was curious as to what felt right about this time that made you feel like you were ready to go do this.
I felt, well, you know, I was a little nervous about going back to Hana. We had really fallen deeply in love there. We had built a house there. We spent a lot of time there. And I was really, frankly, I was scared to go back. I mean, because of all those memories, those just wonderful memories. And I was holding on to those ashes, and I still have some, by the way. You know, a person cremated it's weighty, by the way. No gallows humor here, but that's the truth. So I finally felt it was some closure was needed too. You know, he died December 10th, 2005, and when Jesse and Derek mentioned it, I'm like, I got to think about that, guys. You know, that's a big, heavy deal. So I just decided that it was time. I think Richard, he did need some rest. You know, he does need to rest because he's still very active, I promise you. But in other sense, nuts. But he does wake me up at night sometimes. I promise you. Yeah. But I was ready, really, for some closure, which I hate that word because I don't really believe in closure, but it was just time. It was just time to go, for me to also face it, to face Hana and our memories, and you know, and not be afraid of it, but embrace it too, and embrace the sadness. You know, I got it. Hey, listen, it was fantastic. Everything was. I love Richard enormously, but you know, a lot of it was fucking sad. You know, a lot of it was heartbreaking. But I was ready.
Well, kind of transitioning a little out of that, I mean, even though you said that Richard's still present, so he's not necessarily present with us in that kind of metaphysical sense, but his influence is felt.
That's right.
And so this is a question for the whole panel. Something that Dick Gregory once said that struck me was that he said that Pryor's genius was apparent, and that if you removed his quote-unquote dirty words, that his genius would still be apparent. And he felt that a problem arose when a lot of comedians showed up that thought the language was the key to the genius. And so I was curious about what people's thoughts are on that statement.
Well, I mean, he treated the language like music, you know what I mean? The vernacular was his instrument, you know, and where so much of his lyricism and his prowess came from was using the words the way that we know those words to be used at barbershops in the street. You know, I mean, they're very evocative, they're very provocative. There are definitely many changes that can be rung on a single note, you know, as he showed us. So, and you have to understand as well, I mean, he's making these statements, he's not using these words gratuitously, you know, he's using them to assault, to incite, to challenge, you know, his audiences, you know, and he's making people also recognize the music in the language as well, because that's just so much a part of, you know, what we call the language of the streets, black slang and so forth. I mean, the thing is, I mean, he's a true precursor to the best of what the great lyricists of hip hop offered us, you know, in the 80s and 90s. You know, I mean, that truth right from the gut, right from the environment, right from the narrative of people's lives, but also put in this way that's just unmistakably, you know, artful and poetic, you know, at the same time, and political, you know. And, you know, the thing about this film, I think that it really tackles something that's often kind kind of given a side glance in a lot of documentaries, which is just the burden of that kind of genius, to have to carry all that cauldron, that kind of boiling cauldron of emotional intensity inside of you all the time. And then your job, because you've taken on this profession, is to translate it to audiences in a way that won't make them run away, that'll make them lean in and enjoy getting bitten at the same time. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I would like to go a little deeper with that. What are some other lessons you think that can be learned, creative lessons that could be learned from Richard Pryor?
Be fearless. Be fearless. Tell the truth. Don't be afraid. Work without a net. Go for it.
That deserves an applause, definitely. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
I'm not going out. I'm not going out.
Okay, you don't want to follow that?
No, I'm not following.
That's what they say. I think Letterman said that about Pryor. That's my favorite. He said that to understand the true power of Richard Pryor, you have to have followed him at the Comedy Store, and so he understands that power. I want to move on to another question real quick here. There was some news today, some people may have saw it, about a gigantic scandal that happened in this, like a kind of a bribery college admissions thing. A lot of people are implicated, which is yet another lesson in how this country works in different ways for different people, which was the truth before I experienced it myself, that was gifted to me, if you will, through the comedy of Richard Pryor. So I'm curious as to what some other truths are that were gifted to you through the comedy of Richard Pryor.
Oh, I mean, I think that when he talks about intimate relationships and brings together the beauty of intimacy with the pain of intimacy, I mean, Jennifer can speak to this much more, but I just think that it's difficult and maybe problematic, but I just think that one of the things that makes him not just a comedian is that he was always mixing colors that don't generally go together, often don't go together. They do go together in the blues, say. And I think one of his legacies about being fearless was like, he didn't really respect genres. Like where do you put him in the video store when they used to have video stores with categories? And oftentimes the reason his performances were so great was because, this is a little biopic, and okay, he's going to put in this comic accent. This is a and he always switched things up. And so I think that's part of what it means to be true, is to have all the psychological recognition of those different experiences threaded together, and to not erase them just because you prefer for them not to be there. In his life, they were there.
I mean, he recognized the genius of the black community in the midst of the annihilation of the human spirit that goes on every day, in those communities. He gave the humanity of his people, literally, his people, family, neighborhood, a voice in the world. And the thing is, like, he also recognized that voice is the voice that produced the cultural wealth of this country. It's like all of these people that we think of as, genius, iconic figures in black culture, they came from those neighborhoods, those kind of beginnings. You know what I mean? From that seedbed, blues, jazz, gospel, rock and roll, all of that's coming from that. August Wilson's coming from that. Toni Morrison's coming from that. Beyonce's coming from that. But the people behind those people, those are the ones who are erased from history. And they're the ones who actually give a Richard Pryor his language and his music and his experience of life. So I mean, all of that is there, kind of beneath, the surface of the shits and giggles, between the craft that he employed, but his empathy, for folks, and the ability to talk about people who are essentially like at the mercy of capitalism, at the mercy of racism, and essentially whatever kind of culture and life they create is the best they can do in the moment, you know. So he gets a chance to be removed from that, tell that story, but he doesn't do it with condescension. You know what I mean? He doesn't do it with snarking irony, you know. He puts you inside the bodies of folks and inside the spirits of folks, and he lets them live for that time that they're essential to his storytelling.
Great answer. Thank you so much for mentioning August Wilson, too. If you don't know, now you know. This will be my last question, I guess. This is the last question. You mind if I ask a relatively delicate question? Okay, so, you know, it comes up here and there in the documentary, but this dark side of Richard Pryor, and you were somebody who was in a long relationship with him and experienced a lot of this dark side. We also see, you know, clips of Bill Cosby, and in this era, you know, we're finding out a lot of things about people we held deep to our hearts that, you know, are tricky. And I am also someone who was abused by a loved one who we have worked on it. So I guess my question is, how do you reconcile those things for yourself?
Oh, wow. Okay, first of all, I'm used to indelicate questions. It's quite all right. You can even go further. I thought you were going to.
Oh, yeah? Well, no,
yeah.
I'm trying to be delicate. It's not enough time.
You know, I just understood that it's a paradox. That, first of all, I have to address what you were saying about Richard's empathy. The scene of Duke and Opal, there's a moment and an expression on Richard's face when he looks hurt, and it breaks my heart because he's got such empathy for that junkie on methadone. And the fact that those two kids, white kids, happened to denigrate him, the pain in his face absolutely expressed the empathy that you speak of. I understood Richard. I understood the paradox. Now, sometimes I should have left. I mean, I had to leave when the pipe moved in because it was very dangerous. I was really, you know, I mean, there were a couple of situations that were close calls, quite frankly. I was hanging in for love. I was chasing it, you know, almost like a drug. And by the way, I did drugs too. I was not an angel. And anybody who hangs with somebody who's doing drugs is doing drugs, no matter what. I just didn't do them hardcore like Richard did. You know, I knew how to cut myself off. I knew how to regulate. But I just knew the paradox of Richard. I knew where he came from. I knew the pain. I knew what he was up against, and I knew that when he was the best of himself, he was completely irresistible. And when he was being hurtful and abusive, which he could be, you know, I just wanted to ride it out. I mean, talk about the fear of intimacy, by the way. One time he called me from a whorehouse, and he said, "I'm telling this woman how much I love you." And I said, "Baby, can you come home and tell me?" Because, you know, the intimacy was so scary for him at times that he would run away from it. And, you know, I have my own issues with intimacy too, obviously. But, you know, I just wanted to write it out. And, you know, when I came back, I was really happy that we were able to resurrect the good and leave the lemons behind, so to speak, and really, you know, resurrect the good love that was there, and that was always there, and that will always be there.
Well, thank you so much. Everybody give a round of applause to our panel here. Jennifer Pryor, Jesse James Miller, Greg Tate, Scott Saul. Have a good afternoon.